I walked into my own funeral. My daughter stood at the altar, telling everyone I had passed quietly. Guests whispered condolences, some even wiping fake tears. Inside, my chest tightened, not from weakness, but from betrayal so deep it made me tremble. After everything I built for her, she buried me with lies. But what she didn't know was that I carried proof, papers she could never erase. So when I stepped into the aisle, cane tapping against the floor, the whole church froze, and I asked one question that silenced every voice. If I am dead, then tell me, what exactly did you bury in that box? Stay with me until the end of this story, and before we go further, tell me, what city are you watching from right now? The salt air clung to the morning fog as footsteps carried me down the narrow street toward St. Mary's Parish. The church bell tolled a solemn note, one that should have rung for another man's passing, not mine. The stone walls of the churchyard pressed in, every familiar crack in the masonry whispering of a community that had known me for decades. Yet as I reached the gate, Eudora Kells, the parish elder who had once brought casseroles to my wife's bedside, looked straight at me and whispered, "Poor Aldrich, gone so soon." Her words struck like ice. I stopped, but she shuffled past without a flicker of recognition. Her gaze wasn't on me, but on the black-clad mourners moving through the church doors. They spoke in hushed tones of a tragic accident, a fall near the cliffs, some misstep in the fog. Their words painted me into a coffin while I stood breathing among them. Each phrase carried disbelief deeper into my chest. Inside, the pews creaked under the weight of friends and neighbors. I held back, half hidden near the entrance. Candles lined the altar, their flames trembling in the draught. Then Clarice appeared. My daughter, her black dress tailored, veil draped with practiced sorrow. She moved slowly, deliberately, like a woman who had rehearsed grief. "My father is gone," she told them, her voice breaking on cue. "He left us quietly, without struggle." The words slid across the sanctuary like poison. And there, clinging to her side, was Taryn, my granddaughter. A child's small fingers gripped Clarice's hand, eyes searching the room for comfort. She didn't know. She couldn't. The innocence in her gaze twisted the knife. I stayed in the shadows, breath shallow, mind searching for reason. Some mistake, some confusion. But no, Clarice's voice carried too clearly, too confidently. This was no misunderstanding. It was theater. My own blood had staged my death. The casket loomed at the altar, a sealed box polished to a shine. Benton Crail, Clarice's husband, stood with practiced solemnity beside it. He placed a hand on the lid as if to bless it, then turned to the crowd. "We gather to honor Aldrich Van's legacy," he said, tone heavy with false reverence. Behind him, my eye caught a figure I knew too well. Harlan Quaid, the notary. His presence sent a shiver through me. What business had a man of law at a funeral? Unless this wasn't only about mourning, it was about possession, signatures, property slipping quietly into hands unworthy of it. Clarice's voice rose again. She drew out a folded paper, her words steady, polished. "My father wished for stability in his final years. He entrusted everything to me, so our family would remain secure." Gasps and murmurs swept the pews. She pressed forward, voice growing firm. He was confused, often lost in his thoughts. It fell to me to protect what he built. My hand tightened on the back of the pew until the wood groaned. Shame and rage burned hotter than the candles at the altar. Confusion in my final years. She was burying me alive in lies, stripping not only my name but the dignity that had carried me through 78 years of storms, labor, and sacrifice. The moment snapped. I moved. The cane tapped against the stone floor, each step echoing like a drumbeat. Heads turned. One by one, gasps filled the sanctuary. The whispers of my death collapsed into silence. Clarice froze mid-sentence. The color drained from her face, veil trembling as her lips parted without sound. Benton's jaw tightened, his hand clenching the casket as though it could anchor him. The weight of every eye fell on me as I reached the aisle's center. The hush was so deep it carried my voice like thunder when I spoke, cold and measured. "If I am dead," I asked, "then tell me, what exactly did you bury in that box?" The silence cracked. A groan of wood echoed as someone forced the coffin lid open. The creak of the coffin lid still echoed through the church. Every ear strained to hear what was inside. A draft slipped through the aisles, lifting the edges of black veils and stirring the candles at the altar. The satin lining of the coffin gleamed in the dim light, untouched, unmarked, empty. Gasps swept the pews like a sudden storm. A silence heavier than grief hung over the room. People shifted uncomfortably, crossing themselves, whispering into their sleeves. Their eyes darted from the hollow coffin back to me, as though searching for an explanation they weren't ready to accept. My voice cut through it, sharper than I intended. "So this is the proof of my death?" The words bounced off stone walls, echoing with a force that startled even me. Clarissa's head snapped toward me, her face rigid, frozen in disbelief. Benton moved closer to her side, a hand on her arm, though his eyes betrayed unease. I took a step toward the altar, cane clicking against the floor, each sound marking the space between truth and lie. Benton fumbled with a folded paper he had kept tucked into his coat. His lips parted as if to soothe the crowd, but his fingers trembled. He held it up like a sacred relic. "Aldrich Van," he declared, forcing steadiness into his tone, "passed away 2 weeks ago in his sleep. The record is here." He nodded to Harlan Quaid, the town's notary, who rose stiffly from his pew. The man adjusted his glasses and reached for the paper as though conducting a routine affirmation. I extended my hand before he could speak. "Give it to me." The paper crackled as I unfolded it. The words blurred for a moment, but one thing burned clear. My name, stamped beside a date of death, and a signature meant to be mine. My breath caught, not from frailty, but fury. "This is my hand, my name." "Do you think I wouldn't know the shape of my own signature?" The congregation leaned forward, faces pale, as if the ground itself had shifted beneath them. From the side aisle, a hushed exchange caught my ear. Clarice leaned toward a man in a banker's suit, her voice barely above a whisper but sharp enough to cut. "The house will be sold within weeks. The paperwork is nearly finalized." The words landed like a weight on my chest. My home, every nail I hammered, every board I stained, every storm I weathered inside those walls, reduced to currency in her mouth. It wasn't just a funeral staged to erase me. It was an auction to dismantle the life I had built. Murmurs spread through the pews again, some glancing at me with sympathy, others looking away, unwilling to stand against her. The sight of that banker, the sound of Clarice's promise, dragged me back years. I remembered mixing mortar with cracked hands, my wife steadying the ladder as I set shingles under a pale winter sun. That house had been more than wood and brick. It had been our refuge, our testament of survival. Clarissa's gaze slid away when mine locked on hers. Shame should have filled her face, but it didn't. Instead, it was cold calculation. At the far end, Merritt Fane sat quietly, his weathered face marked with the same disbelief I felt. He caught my eye, gave a single, steady nod, no words. Just the silent assurance of someone who hadn't yet abandoned me. The paper quivered in my grip, not from weakness, but from anger contained too long. My voice steadied, iron beneath the weariness of years. "You buried my name," I said slowly. "And now you plan to bury my home." Clarice's eyes flared. "You're confused," she snapped, her voice rising high enough to pierce the stillness. "The papers are legal. Everyone knows you've been slipping for years." The crowd gasped, scandal clinging to the air. Benton stepped forward as if to back her claim, but his jaw tightened, betraying the fear beneath. I raised the forged certificate above my head, letting every trembling candle flame reflect off it. The weight of eyes pressed in from every corner of the church. "If I am already dead on this paper," I asked, my voice slicing through the silence, Then tell me, daughter, how am I standing here before you?" The church erupted in whispers. The coffin sat hollow at the altar, and Clarissa's hands curled into fists at her sides. The murmurs from the parish still clung to my ears as I walked down the church steps. Evening air cut through the damp collar of my coat, carrying with it the scent of salt from the harbor. In my pocket, the forged death certificate crinkled each time my hand brushed against it. It felt like a live coal pressed to my chest. Every step toward home weighed heavier than the last. Memories crowded in, nights working double shifts to keep the lights on, mornings carrying lumber to build the very house my daughter now planned to sell. Betrayal didn't just sting, it hollowed me out, leaving silence where pride used to live. The shuffle of feet followed me into the churchyard. A hand, steady and firm, touched my arm. Turning, I met the weathered face of Merritt Fane. His gray hair was tucked beneath a cap, and his eyes, though dimmed by years, burned with outrage. He didn't waste words on sympathy. Instead, his voice cut clean. "You are not alone in this fight, Aldrich. Don't you forget that." His words landed with the weight of an anchor dropped into turbulent waters. For the first time that day, the ground beneath me felt solid. We walked together in silence for a block, his presence enough to calm the storm building inside. At the corner, he paused. "They'll twist the law, but paper can't replace flesh and blood standing before them. You have truth, and I'll help you find the proof." The vow steadied me, even as exhaustion pressed hard on my shoulders. Hope flickered where despair had rooted itself. By the time I reached my house, dusk had settled, painting the clapboards in muted gray. My hands trembled as I sorted through the mail on the stoop. Envelopes bore Clarissa's name, not mine. A foreclosure notice slipped from the stack, stamped in bold red. Final notice. My breath caught. Another letter carried the seal of the local bank. Inside, words leapt from the page. Mortgage transferred. New owner of record. Each phrase sliced deeper. Proof that my daughter had already moved to carve me out of my own home. Inside, the house groaned with the familiar creaks of age. I dialed the bank, desperation sharpening my tone. After minutes of lifeless hold music, a clerk's voice answered, flat and certain. "According to our records, Mr. Van, you are deceased." The phone nearly slipped from my hand. Blood roared in my ears, drowning out the rest of her explanation. To them, I was already erased. Not a man, not a father, just a file marked closed. The receiver landed in its cradle with a dull thud. My palms sweated, but my jaw locked in silence. Rage burned, but shouting at walls would only waste breath. My wife's memory rose in the quiet, her gentle insistence on dignity, even in the darkest trials. That memory steadied me more than anger ever could. If they wished to bury me on paper, then I would rise in flesh with proof they could not deny. The lamp by my chair threw long shadows across the room. I sat there, listening to the house breathe, feeling the weight of absence where family should have been. Determination hardened with each tick of the clock. When the knock came, it startled me, though I had been waiting for something, anything. Merritt stood at the door, eyes sharp, voice low. He pressed a sealed envelope into my hand. "This," he whispered, "may be the thread to unravel it all." The paper trembled as I slid my finger beneath the flap. The hall beside St. Mary's was heavy with the smell of coffee and the muted shuffle of polite conversation. People carried plates of sandwiches and murmured their condolences as though nothing unusual had happened that day. Yet every glance I caught lingered too long, as if trying to decide whether they were looking at a grieving widower or a ghost who had no place among the living. The folded document still pressed against my palm, my so-called death certificate, its edges cutting into my skin as a reminder of the lie I was fighting to breathe against. Clarisse moved to the front of the room, her black dress flowing as if the fabric itself mourned. She lifted a glass and smiled at the crowd with a poise that chilled me. "Thank you for coming tonight," she began, her voice smooth and confident. "My father. Well, his time came sooner than expected, but he left us with lessons, and I carry them forward." Some nodded respectfully. Others darted their eyes toward me, unsure whether to stand or sit, speak or stay silent. I stayed rooted in the corner, invisible in plain sight, Her words sharpened like knives as she spoke of my supposed decline. In the last years, he wasn't the man you once knew. He was confused, unable to manage his own affairs. It fell on me to take responsibility. Each syllable stripped away decades of labor, nights fixing roofs, mornings hauling nets in icy water to keep bread on the table. I could feel humiliation pressing against my ribs, though I kept my shoulders squared. Around me, I caught fragments of shifting reactions, a nod here, a sigh there, and the steady avoidance of eyes unwilling to meet mine. Then she turned fully toward me, as if waiting for the perfect moment to strike. "You're nothing but a living ghost," she said, voice cutting through the room like glass shattering, clinging to a past that doesn't belong to you. A ripple of gasps spread. Benton leaned against the wall with his arms crossed, the hint of a smirk tugging at his mouth. My chest burned, not from weakness, but from the weight of her words. Humiliation swelled, but I stood straighter, forcing my cane firmly to the floor to keep myself anchored. I looked across the faces, committing them to memory, the banker who chuckled softly, the neighbor who looked away, ashamed, and those who said nothing at all. Silence can be as cruel as laughter. Then my gaze landed on Taryn, my granddaughter, her small hands gripping her dress, her brows furrowed. Confusion etched her face, a child caught between the sharp edges of adult lies and loyalties. That single look reminded me that fury was easy, but endurance would be my truest weapon. My silence was not surrender, it was calculation. The chatter in the hall died when I finally spoke. My voice did not rise. It carried low, steady, with the weight of years behind it. "A ghost may be silent," I said, pausing just long enough to let the words hang in the stale air. "But silence remembers." A few eyes widened. Clarissa's confident mask flickered, her lips pressing tightly together as if the edges of her certainty were fraying. For a moment, the room felt colder, as though my words had pulled something honest into the open that none of them could deny. While the crowd shifted uncomfortably, Merritt appeared beside me without fanfare, his presence quiet but firm. He slipped a folded piece of paper into my hand, his eyes steady with unspoken assurance. On it was a single word: tomorrow. I closed my fist around it, understanding that whatever lay ahead would demand more than anger. It would demand patience, precision, and the kind of strength my daughter never counted on me having. Without another word, I left the hall, cane tapping against the wood floor, carrying that note like a blade not yet drawn. Dawn crept into the small coastal home with a faint orange glow spilling across the worn kitchen table. The single word on Merritt's note, tomorrow, rested where I had left it the night before. My eyes lingered on the page as though it carried the weight of a tombstone. Clarissa's words from the hall echoed, every syllable pressing down on me, living ghost. The insult rattled around in my chest, but so did something else. Resolve. If they had already buried me in name, I would prove that a man could rise from such a grave. The cane leaned by the door, polished from years of use. I grasped it and stepped outside. The sea air sharp against my lungs. The gulls screamed overhead, mocking, or maybe reminding me that Rockport had always been a place where survival belonged to the stubborn. By mid-morning, I found myself standing in a quiet office lined with law books. Merritt's recommendation had led me here. The lawyer, a thin man with silver glasses, studied the documents I carried. He flipped through the forged certificate and deeds as though he were sifting dirt for gold. "These are dangerous papers, Mr. Van," he finally said, his voice carrying the weight of disapproval. "If your daughter has already filed them, the court will assume you're incompetent, or not alive at all." The sting of those words bit harder than I expected. My knuckles whitened against the cane. I am standing right here, breathing, talking. How can the law not see that? He pressed his lips together. Because on paper, you don't exist, and courts prefer paper over people. Frustration flared, but I kept my tone measured. Then I'll fight with proof. If paper killed me, paper will bring me back. The lawyer looked unconvinced but not dismissive. It will take time. Be prepared for resistance. I left his office with a fire under my ribs, the cane tapping against the hardwood floor with each step like the drum of defiance. The town square bustled as usual, unaware that one of its old residents was being erased in plain sight. The bank stood across the street, a brick building that had once felt safe, even dignified. Inside, the marble floor echoed each strike of my cane. I approached the teller, a young man with polite eyes, and handed over my account information. He hesitated. "Sir, I'm sorry, but this account is frozen." "Frozen?" My voice dropped low. "Yes." He glanced at his screen. "All holdings transferred under the authority of Clarice Hodge. According to our records, you are," he cleared his throat, "deceased." The words rang through me like a church bell at a funeral I hadn't attended. Anger surged hot, yet beneath it was humiliation so sharp it almost stole my breath. I leaned closer, eyes fixed on his. "Do I look dead to you?" He shrank back, unable to answer. A manager appeared, his tone cold, clinical. "Mr. Van, I understand your frustration, but until the paperwork is corrected, our system recognizes your daughter's authority." The cane struck the marble hard as I turned away. Each tap echoed like a declaration. I was not gone, no matter what their records claimed. Outside, Merritt was waiting. He steadied me with one hand on my shoulder. "They've built a wall around you," he said quietly. "But walls can be climbed." I exhaled, heavy with more than age. "They're taking more than my house. They're taking my name." His eyes, steady as the tide, met mine. "Then we'll show them who Aldrich Van really is. When the time comes, I'll stand by you. I'll testify." For the first time all day, the weight eased slightly. We walked together down the cobblestone street, two old men against the tide of a town too willing to believe lies on paper. That evening, back in my modest home, I sat at the table again. A blank notebook lay open before me. One by one, I began writing a list: documents, witnesses, dates, moments only I could know. Each line was not just memory, it was ammunition, my silent arsenal. If they had built a coffin for me, I would dismantle it with ink and truth. The room grew still as the sun dropped behind the horizon. A knock came at the door. On the mat lay an envelope. My name scratched across it in Clarice's handwriting. I held it in my hand. The paper felt heavier than any stone, as though it carried not just words but the weight of her next strike. Morning light filtered through the salt-stained windows of my small coastal home, catching on the envelope that had been waiting on my table since yesterday. Clarice's handwriting stretched across the front, sharp and cold, as though each letter was carved with spite. My fingers hovered before breaking the seal, almost afraid of what venom lay inside. The paper unfolded with a crisp snap. Her words were neat, calculated, and cruel. "From now on, your affairs are mine. Resist, and you'll lose even the roof over your head." For a moment, the room felt smaller, the walls pressing in around me. The cane in my hand dug against the wooden floor until the echo filled the room, steady and sharp, a rhythm of fury trying to stay contained. Beneath the letter was a second page, one that made my stomach twist. It bore the signature of a doctor whose name I recognized only from whispers around town, a man who had traded integrity for money long ago. The page was labeled Competency Evaluation. According to this fabricated report, I was confused, unable to manage daily life, and in need of guardianship. My own daughter was using this to erase me, not just from the bank ledgers, not just from the deeds, but from existence itself. Her taunt was written plainly in her hand. "Fight me, and I'll have you placed in assisted living. Stay silent, and you may live out your days quietly." The humiliation stung deeper than any forged death certificate. To be called dead was one thing. To be called incapable. To be treated as though my mind had withered before my body. That was a cruelty I never imagined she could deliver. I folded the papers slowly, not because I was resigned, but because the anger needed taming. Fury without focus was just noise, and she already believed me senile. I needed to be sharper than ever, I made my way down the narrow lane to Merritt Fane's home, the cane tapping a steady beat against the cracked sidewalk. When he opened his door, his face carried the same stern warmth it always had. Without a word, I handed him the letter. He read silently, his brow tightening with each line. "This is poison," he muttered, shaking his head. "And this so-called doctor, he'd sell his name to anyone who paid him." He set the letter down and looked straight at me. "You are not alone in this fight. I'll stand in that courtroom and swear you're sharper than half the men in this town, myself included." His words should have been a balm, and in some ways they were. But I felt the weight of dragging others into my storm. I pressed my hand against the table and told him, "This is my fight, Merritt. I can't ask you to." "You're not asking," he interrupted, voice firm. "The truth demands it, and I will not watch a friend be buried alive." The gratitude swelled in my chest, mixing with the heaviness of loyalty. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something solid beneath me, an anchor. By late afternoon, the sound of knuckles rapping against my door jarred me from my thoughts. I opened it to a courier in a dark jacket. His eyes barely met mine as he handed me an official envelope and walked away. My heart thudded against my ribs as I tore it open. Inside was a court summons. Clarice had filed for full conservatorship, claiming I was incapable of managing my affairs. My hands trembled as I read the words, but beneath the fear something hardened. She was trying to strip me of my name, my dignity, my independence. She had already stolen the death certificate, the bank records, and now this, but she had not yet stolen my will. I placed the summons beside her poisonous letter on the table, staring at them like trophies of betrayal. They were evidence not only of her treachery but of her desperation. That night, I lit a lamp and spread documents across the table, deeds, old photographs, letters written in my wife's careful hand. Each one was proof of my legacy, proof that I had built and maintained my life with clarity and strength. The flickering light caught the edge of one letter from her, words I knew by heart. "This is where we belong." I began to sort them into neat stacks, my arsenal for the battle ahead. But as I worked, a chill ran through me. My hand reached for one deed, the most valuable, the cornerstone of my estate, and found only an empty space. Panic surged. I rifled through the folders again, but it was gone. I leaned back in the chair, breathing hard, the truth hitting me like a crashing wave. The missing deed wasn't lost. It had been taken. My eyes narrowed, and the words escaped my lips in a whisper that carried the weight of certainty. I know exactly whose hands it has fallen into. The town clerk's office smelled faintly of old paper and polish, a place I had visited countless times over the years when paying taxes or renewing permits for the property I'd built with my own hands. That morning, the air felt different, thick with suspicion and dread. My cane tapped sharply against the linoleum floor as I approached the counter. "I want to know what happened to the deed for my property," I said, steady but loud enough that the young clerk behind the desk flinched. She fumbled with her files, eyes darting away from mine. "Mr. Van, according to our records, your daughter presented the proper authorization." "What authorization?" The word scraped through my throat. Her lips tightened. "A power of attorney, signed by you, allowing her to transfer the deed." I leaned closer, placing both hands on the counter. "I never signed any such thing." My voice dropped to a low growl. "Look me in the eye and tell me you believe I did." She looked down. That was answer enough. The truth hit like a hammer. Clarice had stolen not only my name, but also the very ground beneath my feet. By afternoon, the whispers had spread faster than the tide rolling in from the bay. At the diner where I once had coffee with neighbors every morning, heads turned as I walked in, then quickly turned back again. The conversation quieted into awkward silence. "He finally lost it," someone muttered just loud enough for me to hear. At church, Mrs. Kells avoided my greeting, pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders. The sting of betrayal came not only from my daughter's forgery, but from the community's willingness to believe her lies. Clarisse's smear campaign had worked. "He's senile," they whispered. He's dangerous. He doesn't know what he's saying. Humiliation pressed against my ribs, but behind it burned a deeper flame. If they wanted a ghost, I would be the kind that haunted them. That evening, Merritt found me pacing by the water's edge. My house loomed behind us, though for how much longer I could call it mine was now in question. You have to stay steady, he said firmly, gripping my shoulder. If she forged one document, she'll forge another. We need evidence. Aldrich. Solid, undeniable proof. I've spent a lifetime building that home, I muttered, the words catching in my throat. And now my own daughter tells the town it's hers. She thinks your age is weakness, Merritt said, eyes narrowing. Let her underestimate you. That will be her mistake. His words steadied me. I was no longer just an old man fighting for dignity. I was a father reclaiming stolen legacy. When dusk painted the sky with bruised colors, I walked to Clarice's coastal home. The salt wind carried the sound of gulls, sharp and jeering like the laughter I knew I would face inside. I knocked once. Benton opened the door, his smirk greeting me before his words did. You're done, old man, he sneered, blocking the entry. Clarice appeared behind him, arms folded, her voice as cold as the Atlantic. It's my house now, Father. Even the town says so. The words hit harder than any slap. My cane pressed against the porch rail to steady the tremor in my hand. I wanted to roar, to curse her for the thief she was, but I knew rage would only feed her narrative. So I turned, walking away under their laughter. The boards creaked beneath my steps, each one an oath that this fight was not over. Back at my home, silence wrapped around me like armor. I pulled out the tin box where I'd hidden copies of my wife's letters, old deeds, and bank statements she and I had safeguarded decades ago. Sorting through the papers, my eyes froze on one record I'd nearly forgotten, a hidden trust, long untouched, left in my name alone. Clarice had no knowledge of it. No forged signature could reach it. My pulse steadied. She thought she had buried me. She thought I was finished. But this trust was my card, the one she would never see coming. The courthouse smelled of old wood and stale air, like too many battles had already been fought inside those walls. My legs felt heavy as I walked toward the bench, cane steadying each step, but there was no hesitation. Across the aisle, Clarice sat poised in black, Benton by her side with that familiar smirk plastered across his face. They looked like victors waiting for the judge to sign off on their prize. Whispers floated from the benches where neighbors had gathered. Some nodded in sympathy. Others eyed me with suspicion, as though uncertain if I truly belonged here. My own funeral had made me a stranger in the town I had once helped build. The judge looked down over his glasses, weary, as if another case of family squabbles bored him. He wanted papers, signatures, the kind of neat story that didn't require looking a man in the eyes. Then Clarice stood, her voice carried, smooth and polished, dripping with feigned sorrow. Your Honor, I only want what's best for my father. He's confused. He cannot handle his affairs. She gestured to a stack of papers, like a magician revealing her trick. Benton slid a hand over the pile, nodding solemnly, as though he were the guardian of my legacy. She called her first witness. A neighbor I'd once helped shovel snow took the stand, but now her voice trembled as she spoke lies. He forgets his own name sometimes, leaves the stove on, wanders into the street, unsure of where he's going. Each word was a nail hammered into a coffin she wanted the world to believe I belonged in. My grip on the cane tightened, knuckles white, yet I forced myself to stand silent. My blood boiled, but an outburst would only play into her script. Benton's smirk widened. The judge scribbled notes, indifferent to the sting of betrayal lacing each falsehood. Murmurs rolled across the room, feeding on doubt. I could feel the walls of the courtroom pressing in, trying to bury me again. This time not with wood and satin, but with ink and testimony. Then Merritt rose. His voice cut through the haze like a chisel splitting stone. Your Honor, I've spoken with Aldrich every day this past week. His mind is sharper than most men half his age. He remembers details, tells stories, even corrects me when I misspeak. He looked directly at me, then back at the judge. This man built homes with his own hands. He guided workers, signed contracts, managed finances. If he is incompetent, then half this town wouldn't stand. The room shifted. I saw eyes soften, doubt slipping into Clarice's performance. The judge leaned back. Penn paused. "We will postpone this matter," he said, "until further proof can be reviewed." It wasn't victory, but it wasn't defeat. A fragile thread of hope wove itself around me. That evening, the so-called family council gathered in the basement of St. Mary's. Clarice had summoned them, dressing her betrayal in the robes of concern. Folding chairs scraped against the old floor as cousins, aunts, and distant kin filed in. Benton leaned against the wall, arms crossed, his smirk dimmer now but still present. Clarice stood at the front, her voice once again smooth and commanding. "He wants to undo everything, to tear away stability, to drag us through years of chaos. You know him. Stubborn, prideful. This isn't about love or legacy. It's about control." Her eyes scanned the room, daring anyone to disagree. Taryn sat near the front, her small hands folded in her lap, eyes wide. Confusion painted across her young face. She glanced at me, then back at her mother, torn between two truths she couldn't reconcile. I said nothing. Sometimes silence has more power than 1,000 words. My gaze moved across the faces, noting who looked down, who nodded, who avoided me. It was a battlefield, but one fought with glances and whispers. Then Merritt moved. From the shadows, he placed a small recorder on the table, a click, and Clarice's voice filled the basement. Cold, sharp, undeniable. Once the papers were filed, burying him legally was easy. He's nothing now. Gasps rippled through the chairs. A cousin pressed a hand to her mouth. Another relative stepped back from Clarice as if her words had turned her into a stranger. Benton lunged forward, trying to snatch the device, but the sound had already sunk into every ear. Clarice's face drained of color, her lips parting without words. I rose slowly, cane steady, eyes locked on hers. For the first time, she had no script to hide behind, no lies to shield her, only her voice, echoing back at her, a confession she could never take back. And for the first time, I had the truth echoing on my side. The silence after Merritt's small recorder clicked off weighed heavier than any words I could have spoken. Faces around the church basement were stiff, pale, or turned away. Clarice sat frozen, mouth parted but no sound escaping, while Benton's jaw clenched tight as if holding back curses. The room seemed to exhale all at once, and then the scraping of chairs filled the space as relatives began to rise. No one spoke to me, no one spoke to her. The truth had landed like a stone in water, sending ripples none of us could stop. I watched uncles and cousins file out, some casting dark looks in Clarice's direction, others refusing to meet my eyes. Their silence said more than any speech could. This family was splitting down its middle. My granddaughter, poor Taryn, clutched at her dress and looked at both of us with a face too young for such confusion. She darted toward the stairs and was gone before I could call her name. That sound, her shoes tapping against the basement steps, echoed louder than Clarice's insults ever had. Walking up into the cool evening, I felt no triumph. My heart carried sorrow heavier than victory. Blood had betrayed blood, and now the branches of this family tree bent in opposite directions. Conversations broke out in hushed tones outside the church. Some kin muttered that Clarice had gone too far. Others whispered that I was manipulating Merritt, that the recording was a trick. No one approached me to offer comfort. Betrayal spreads like smoke, and once it lingers in the air, everyone coughs. Back at my house, the echoes were worse. The walls remembered laughter, my wife's voice, birthdays when Clarice was small, and her mother would fuss over the cake. I sat in the quiet and felt her absence like a second death. "They've stolen more than my name," I said aloud to the empty room. "They've stolen our family." The words broke something inside me, but tears never came. Only a steady ache, the kind that makes a man older than his years. News traveled fast in Rockport. By the next afternoon, whispers greeted me in the town square. heads tilted together at the diner window as I passed. A flyer flapped against a lamppost. Warning: Aldrich Van is not of sound mind. My daughter's handwriting cloaked in printed letters. The humiliation tightened my throat. I walked on, cane striking pavement, each step a reminder that I still lived, no matter what paper or rumor declared. At dusk, I returned home carrying the weight of every stare, every sideways glance. I placed my cane by the door and sat heavily, pulling open the old drawer where I kept the folder Merritt had encouraged me to guard. Inside were the trust papers, the one shield Clarice didn't know existed. My fingers lingered on the pages. These documents weren't just paper. They were years of work, memories, and promises I'd made to my wife. Promises Clarice couldn't erase. The night grew late when Merritt knocked. He stepped in without ceremony, his face lined with the same exhaustion I felt. "Don't let this break you," he said quietly. "She's desperate now. That means you still have ground to stand on." His words steadied me more than he knew. For weeks, I had been reacting, deflecting blows, defending my name. Now, staring at the folder, I understood. It was my turn to strike. I looked up at him, voice low but firm. "The next move is mine." The house was quiet, but inside me a storm gathered. I was done waiting for me. The courthouse steps felt steeper than they had any right to be. Morning air clung damp and cold to my lungs, but each breath was steady. Merritt kept close at my side, not as a crutch, but as a witness to the fight that had dragged me here. In my briefcase, the folder of trust papers pressed against my palm like a weapon I had sharpened in silence. Clarice arrived minutes later with Benton at her elbow. They carried themselves like victors walking into a coronation. Her black suit was sharp, her chin high. I caught the faint curl of a smile when she noticed me climbing the last step. It wasn't the smile of a daughter, it was the grin of someone convinced she had already buried me. People on the sidewalk whispered, some pointing, some pulling their coats tighter as if even standing near me risked scandal. Inside, the courtroom smelled faintly of polish and dust, benches packed with curious townsfolk, reporters scribbled in their pads, lenses flashing. The judge entered, a stern woman with eyes that missed nothing. She called the session to order, her voice cracking across the room like a gavel before the actual gavel struck. When Harlan Quaid took the stand, I leaned forward, cane gripped tight. His voice, though calm, carried weight. He confirmed the signatures he'd seen filed weren't mine, that the death certificate was presented under Clarice's instruction. Each word cut through the air, through me, through her. Clarice shot to her feet, shouting denials, pointing at him, at me, anywhere but herself. The judge's voice boomed. "Silence!" She slammed her gavel until the echoes shivered through the wood panels. Clarice froze, chest heaving, lawyers at her side whispering furiously to calm her. Benton tugged at his tie, the first crack in his mask. For once, I didn't need to speak. The courtroom murmured, waves of disbelief rippling as Harlan continued, dates that didn't match, documents filed before supposed signatures. I sat straighter, refusing to let my face twist into triumph. Dignity was my last armor. By midday, news had already spilled beyond those walls. Reporters passed notes, whispered headlines into their phones. Elderly father betrayed by his own daughter, declared dead while still alive. Murmurs shifted in the gallery, no longer whispers of doubt, but of sympathy. A woman from St. Mary's wiped tears from her cheeks. Another nodded firmly in my direction as though the weight of gossip had finally lifted. Clarice's mask cracked further. Her hands shook as she whispered furiously to Benton. He rose, stumbling through a defense, but contradictions stacked up faster than he could speak them. The judge pressed, cutting into his flimsy excuses, while I answered questions with steady, measured words. Each time I spoke, I felt the eyes of the room settle, judging not whether I was senile, but whether I was still a man worth listening to. And with each answer, the verdict became clearer. Finally, the judge leaned forward, her tone deliberate. The court issues a preliminary injunction. Mr. Aldrich Van is recognized as legally alive. His property rights remain intact until a full hearing concludes. Furthermore, The matter of possible fraud and perjury committed by Ms. Clarisse Hodge will be referred to the district attorney. Gasps, then applause, then the shuffle of feet as the gallery broke into scattered clapping. My chest swelled, not with pride, but with something heavier, vindication, the kind that tastes of salt and iron. Outside, the square was buzzing with townsfolk. Reporters swarmed, but Clarisse cut through the crowd, her perfume sharp as she leaned close enough for only me to hear. "This isn't over," she hissed. Her voice was venom, soft enough to hide from the cameras, sharp enough to pierce bone. I kept walking, cane tapping the stone, Merritt at my side. For the first time in months, my head rose high above the whispers, yet her words clung to me all the way home, a shadow that reminded me my battle was far from done. The night was long and sleepless. Every time I closed my eyes, her voice returned, sharp as a blade. "This isn't over." It circled through the silence of the house until the walls themselves seemed to whisper it back. I lay there staring at the ceiling, wondering how much of Clarisse's venom came from greed, and how much from some hidden pain I had failed to see. A father's heart wants to believe his child can be saved, even when the evidence cuts deep. By midnight, I had given up on sleep. The house groaned in the winter wind, and I found myself pacing the living room, running a hand along the photographs that lined the mantel. My late wife's smile looked back at me, steady and kind. "What did we miss?" I whispered to her image. "Where did we go wrong with her?" No answer came. Only the soft tick of the clock reminding me of all the time lost. Near dawn, a soft knock startled me. I opened the door, and there she was, Clarisse. No smugness, no painted confidence, only swollen eyes and trembling hands. She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. "Dad," she began. Her voice cracked. "Please, drop the charges." Her words fell heavy between us. She clutched at the back of a chair as if it might keep her standing. "I only wanted what was mine," she insisted, tears sliding down her cheeks. "You never trusted me. You always held everything back." The sight of her crying tugged at the deepest part of me. Memories of her as a little girl rushed in. Scraped knees, bedtime stories, that laugh she used to carry like sunlight. But then I remembered the casket, the forged paper, the way she declared me dead while standing over an empty box. My chest tightened. "What was yours, Clarisse?" I asked quietly. "The house I built with my own hands? The name you tried to bury before I was gone?" She flinched, turning away as if my gaze was too much. "I was desperate," she muttered. "I didn't know what else to do." Her words hung in the air, half excuse, half confession. My fists clenched at my sides, not from rage but from the torment of having to choose between love for a daughter and the duty to protect myself. When she left, the house felt colder than before. Her footsteps faded, but the ache she left remained sharp. I sat by the window until dawn broke, light spilling pale over the ocean, restless and weary. That morning, another knock came, firmer this time. It was Eudora Kells, the parish elder, wrapped in her gray shawl. She stepped inside, her eyes sharper than her years. "I heard she came to you last night," she said without preamble. I nodded, too tired to deny it. "Forgiveness is holy," she reminded me, "but blindness is sin. Protect yourself, Aldrich. Do not mistake her tears for repentance. Wolves know how to cry." Her words struck deep, and though part of me bristled, I knew she spoke truth. Faith calls for mercy, but faith also calls for wisdom. Later that afternoon, Merritt arrived, carrying his usual calm like a steadying hand. He found me hunched over the dining table, Clarisse's letter and the summons spread before me. She begged me to let it go, I confessed, my voice low. He sat across, eyes firm. "And did you believe her?" "I wanted to," I admitted. "God help me, I still want to. But every time I look at what she's done," my voice trailed off, swallowed by the weight of betrayal. Merritt leaned closer. "You're not just fighting for yourself. You're fighting for the legacy you and your wife built, for Taryn's future, for the truth. That means you can't bend now. no matter how much it hurts. I let out a long breath, the kind that feels like it carries years behind it. My hands traced the edge of a photograph of my wife, her smile gentle, her eyes unwavering. "I will not fail you," I whispered to the frame, "nor her again." When Merritt left, the house grew quiet once more. But inside me, something had shifted. The summons lay on the table, its seal unbroken, but I knew what it meant: the final hearing, the last judgment that would decide not only my property, but the very truth of my life. I picked it up, hands trembling. The words blurred for a moment before my eyes cleared. The date was set: Judgment Day, for both father and daughter. The morning light crept in through the curtains, carrying with it the kind of chill only autumn in New England could bring. I stood before the mirror, fumbling with the same black tie I had worn the day we buried my wife. It wasn't grief alone that made my hands tremble. It was the weight of what this day meant. Today the court would decide if I was a living man with a name and legacy, or just a ghost stripped of everything by his own blood. The courthouse loomed tall as I approached, cane in hand, Merritt steady at my side. Each step echoed on the granite steps, and I could feel the eyes of my neighbors, the whispers of reporters, the cold stares of those who had doubted me. Yet beneath their gaze, I felt no shame. I walked as a man who had endured betrayal and carried it like armor. Inside, the gallery was packed. Clarice sat near the front, draped in sharp black, her lips tight. Benton by her side, though his shoulders sagged with unease. The judge entered, and silence fell. My breath caught as the papers, the ones they said proved my death, were placed before the bench for the final time. The ruling came with a sharpness that cut through every lie. Clarice guilty of fraud and perjury, my name restored, my property rights intact, and worse for her, criminal charges to follow. Benton's hand slipped from hers, his face paling as he backed away like a man abandoning a sinking ship. Clarisse's composure cracked, her voice rising in disbelief before it collapsed into silence. Her body gave way, and for the first time, I saw fear in her eyes. Reporters scribbled, cameras flashed, and a murmur spread among the townsfolk who had gathered. "The old man was right," someone whispered. A woman in the pews reached out and touched my arm as I passed. Outside, on the courthouse steps, the crowd no longer averted their eyes. They met mine with respect. Not pity, but respect. Then came a small figure in the shuffle of feet. Taryn. She clutched my coat sleeve, her young voice trembling. "Grandpa, I'm sorry." Those words pierced deeper than any judgment. And I bent low, pressing my lips gently to her hair. "It's not your fault, child," I whispered. "Never was." Clarice, meanwhile, was led away in handcuffs. Her glare was venomous, but her voice cracked as she spat out one final curse. "You'll die alone, old man." The officers pulled her forward. I did not answer. My silence carried more weight than her bitterness ever could. That evening, when the town had quieted, I walked to the parish garden. The autumn leaves crunched beneath my shoes, the air crisp with the scent of salt from the harbor. Eudora Kells sat on a bench, her kind eyes watching me approach. Merritt joined us, his presence solid as stone. Together we bowed our heads. I looked toward the darkening sky and spoke aloud, not to them, but to my late wife. "Justice is done, but I wish our daughter had chosen love instead of greed. We gave her life, a home, a name, and she chose to bury them all." My throat tightened, but the words had to be said. Eudora laid a hand on mine. "Forgiveness is for God's keeping," she murmured. Merritt nodded, his silence carrying agreement. I rose slowly, the garden path stretching ahead like the years still left to me. My cane struck the earth, each step steady. The storm inside me had calmed. I was not triumphant, but I was not broken either. Under the autumn sky, I walked home at peace, knowing I had defended my name, my dignity, and the legacy no one could ever steal again.